On today's episode, I'm going to chat with you about selling and closing, how that timing is everything. Enjoy.
How old are you going to be before you start to experience life like you want it? I want to tell you right now, whether you like it or not, there is a better way to do business.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Business for Builders podcast. My name's Max, I'm your host. Great to have you in the room. If you're in podcast land, awesome. If you're checking us out on YouTube, appreciate you doing that. Look, at today's episode, as usual, we're going to bring you some steak and potatoes. But before we get cracking, all of that kind of housekeeping, like and subscribe. Get across to Business for Builders VIP. If you've been listening to the show long enough, you'll know what that's about. If you want to have a quick chat with me about business coaching, get across to elitebusinessadvisory.com. Hit the book a consultation. Come talk to me. I've got a bit of a new initiative going for the guys that maybe don't need or want full-time coaching. There's a bit of a coaching on demand. So if you're interested in that, it's a 90-day program. I alluded to it a little bit. Talked about the young guns. And so this is going to be something that is just a little bit more segmented, a little bit more entry level. So if you've got interest in that, hit me up on email. No strings attached, just have a chat. We'll see what you're going to do with your business in your future and see what happens. So on today's episode, as you can see behind me, we're going to talk a little bit about selling and closing. And this really come out of a conversation I had with my construction manager in Nanaimo. And we sort of, it's interesting because I've been down there, I've had a few beers with him, had some lunch, talked about the business. He's made a little bit of money out of the pre-construction stuff that we've been selling. And, I've decided to handball everything from the initial contact right through the construction to this construction phase to this construction manager. But what I have to do is to ensure that he understands as much as possible about how I go about selling. And one of the questions I asked him, I said, do you understand the difference between, selling and closing? And so I was thinking about that as I was preparing, for these recordings. And I thought I'd just drop it on the table, talk to you guys about it real quick. Because like it says on the board, timing is everything. And, in short, what I said, do you know when to stop selling and when to start closing? Or do you know when to stop selling and start asking for the business? And like it says on the board, timing's everything. Because if you go too late, you could miss the deal. And if you go too early, you could sacrifice the deal. And so I'm just going to quickly allude to a few things. This wouldn't be a super long exercise here, but really what we want to do is understand that sales is a process. Okay, it's not pressure, right? I can bully with the best of them, and it's funny because I got a truck where the 2-year leases run out, and I've been talking to a bunch of dealers and trying to do a deal on a truck. And there's one dealership in particular that clearly understands that it's more about pressure than it is about selling or sales. And they just go quickly through the sales process, and then they start to try and closure on the deal, and it is offensive. Because I know what I want and I just want to make the decision when I'm ready, which is an irritation to the average salesperson. However, you've got to be able to sort of continue to nurture that deal. And I see this. There was another Ford dealer. There was another dealer, and then I was chatting to him, and I told him what was up, and then I rang him back a week later, and he pushed me to voicemail. I never got a call back. So it's like, I'm ready to close. And he doesn't take my call, he pushes me to voicemail and then doesn't call me back. Well, I don't know what to say. It's freaking crazy. So this is why moving clients from inquiry to commitment should feel like a natural process. If you're being too laid back, nobody's leading the deal. And some clients will find that offensive because they're like, what's this guy or gal doing? And then the flip side is if you're bullying too hard, like some of my old mates there, about the vehicles, that's offensive as well. Especially, this is why you've got to know what personality you're dealing with, and you've got to cater for that. So, for me, if I get an A-type personality, someone who's a lead dog, then it's easy for me to relate with that person. However, if I'm dealing, let's say that person was a male, if I'm dealing with a female that is not an alpha, that is a different personality, I've got to be very mindful about what I say and do and how I do it. Otherwise, it'll compromise the deal. So, I definitely think that it's a there's got to be a lot of finesse. And I think a lot of the challenge that we face as builders is the fact that we just don't realize. And so what we don't know, we don't know. So today I'm going to try and just clarify a few of these issues, and hopefully that will enable you and maybe empower you a little bit to sell better, right? Okay, so a couple of things I'm going to talk about. We're going to run through the fact that sales is a process. Closing is timing. You've got to know what your pitch and your offer is, obviously. And then understand there's 3 steps to move to a sale inside of point number 4. And then we're going to talk about follow-up and how that can win your deals as well. So the first one there is sales. Sales is a process. Now, what I see often is that when I say process, it involves patience. Because when I'm dealing with homeowners, I've sort of got to regulate, I've got to modulate. If I can't get clients out of the blocks, then I've got a situation whereby I've got to sort of figure out, okay, how much pressure do I apply before I either volunteer a no, or I put them in the suspense file, or I get a no out of them, right? And so, we've got to, now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky because we're talking about projects that might be as small as $5,000 and projects that are as big as $2 million. And the dynamics within those deals from a sales point and an estimating point and a personality point, it's where you and I as builders, we need to be able to, I guess, be like a chameleon, really sort of understand where you and I, the builder, fits in this process. Okay, and it is hard to sometimes be patient, excuse me, because you might have things where you go, I need cash flow, or I haven't hit my numbers for the last 2 months, and I've got to close this deal, and I feel good about it. So you bully, you bully, and then what happens is the client gets further and further away, right? And so it's super important that we understand that sales is a process, and really the goal in the process is that we have got to demonstrate, and we've got to be able to deliver the process with clarity. We've got to win their trust, and there's got to be an element of confidence that comes out of us that's not arrogance, that the client then sees and says, I like to follow this person because they know what they're talking about. Right, the second one there is closing is timing. And I think this is where you've got to figure out in your mind where you're up to with a client. And I think questions are the answers. When I'm talking to myself, I'm like, right, what stands between me and an agreement in principle, a head nod, a yes, Max, let's move ahead. And so knowing what to ask and when to ask the question, that is where, and this is interesting because I guess as a business coach, as an operator to start with, carpenter by trade, builder, and now as a business coach, I try and get a feel when I'm sitting down with you. If you're one of my building clients and I'm sitting with you and you're talking to me about a client, it's easy for me to immerse myself in that situation and then maybe chat with my EBA clients or my builders and just let them know, this is how I feel if I was you. And so this is why these podcasts are great, because it's free information, but when it really comes down to it and when it really counts, there's guys that I've been coaching now for over 12 months, and my role is to always understand what the bottlenecks and the challenges are in their business and help them move through that. Because a lot of the time we get inside of our heads, and sometimes we don't know whether we're punchboard or drilled and whether we're Arthur or Martha. And so it's to try and get some clarity. We're sitting here, I'm sitting down with builders, they're trying to get clarity so that they can bring clarity to the relationship and hopefully close a deal. Well, when you're sitting there by yourself, how do you get the context? How do you figure out, I need a second party's opinion? And that's just some of what we do, what I do when I'm coaching my builder clients. So what we need to do is, I guess, recognize the client's readiness. Like, where is the client at? And this is why this is such a learned craft, because sometimes it's more obvious than others. I mean, if you get a flat no, you kind of know where they're up to. But sometimes I guess what stops a client making a decision to move ahead, whether it's with you or with another builder, is because there is confusion. Now, it's not like it's crazy confusion, but they're just not settled in their understanding of what is actually going on. And I'll give you an example. When I'm talking to these car dealers, since we started out there, and mate, you talk about a level of confusion. Even for me, I walk out of those dealerships shaking my head going, okay, he offered me this on a 48-month term. This truck's got that, and I've literally got to try and put all of these different trucks beside each other to figure out where the most value is for me as a purchaser. Because whether you sit down with Ford or Dodge or Chev or with Toyota, like everyone has got different things, different positives, different negatives. And so it's not just about the lease payment, it's about what the inclusion is. And my biggest bitch right now is that I'm paying more money for less truck. And that's what's got me choked up. I'm like, why would I do this? And so there's confusion in my mind, which means I'm hesitating. And I've got dealerships that are wanting to talk to me, but I can't make a decision. Why? Because I'm a little bit cloudy about, which way I'm going to go. Because I know that I'm not getting as much truck, but I'm paying more money. And that doesn't make me happy. So, we've got to understand that the hesitation really is rooted in confusion. And we've got to be able to ask the right questions and just to get a bit of an understanding, and to provoke, the understanding. To get understanding, what do they say? Seek first to understand and then to be understood. So it's not about me and what I'm selling. I've got to figure out what it is that's concerning them. Now, if I can neutralize each of those bullet points where they go, Max, I'm confused about this. I'm uncertain about that. This other builder's going to include this. This other builder said that. Like, those are the things that if I don't know about those concerns, then I've got no chance of closing the deal because they are prohibitive. They're stopping that client moving ahead. So there's going to be that hesitation, right? So we've got to provoke the conversation in line with that. Like, I went and sat down with a Dodge dealer and I loved the truck. I thought it was a great truck. I made it clear to him that the lease payment was $200 more than where it needed to be. I said, if you can do it for that, we've got a deal. And he just kept chasing me. I said, dude, you're nowhere near it. So what he was doing was trying to bully me into a deal, telling me that he had the right truck. I'm like, the right truck and the right lease payment, then you got a deal. You've only got half the deal done. And he just basically said, well, it's been nice getting to know you and doing business with you or whatever. And then that was it. Like, you could tell he was handcuffed, right? So, but at least that way he had rules and he had parameters and constraints, and those lease payments were never going to come down on his watch. And so we did not do a deal for a Dodge, unfortunately, because it was a nice truck. Right. Okay. So the third one there is know your pitch. I think we go in sometimes if we're not well rehearsed and we don't actually know what we're offering, which I think we should all have a little giggle at, because it's like, we're builders. We know what we're doing and know how to build houses. But the thing is, because every homeowner is different and every homeowner is sort of unpredictable, knowing your offer and knowing your pitch, really we're counterpunchers. And so when the client comes to me, I've got to figure out what's important to them, make it important to me, and see if I can then create a deal around that, And some of the things will be negative. Some of the pushback that you get is not fixable. I'm sure you've had this. I got a phone call the other day saying, Max, I've had my brother-in-laws through and they tell me your price is too high. And, it takes every part of me not to go into coach mode, but because I don't want to, upset the client and have a crack at their brother-in-laws, because it's like, well, they've been in the house 5 minutes. I've been on this quote now for 10 hours, and I'm sure they haven't considered everything that I've got to consider as the builder. Knowing that. So you've got to know your price, know your value, know your specs. You can get caught out if you're not. I think if you have this down, your ability to persuade In other words, persuasion is just to help somebody else see it your way, okay? We're not talking about trying to coerce or bribe or con, but it's like what I need to do as the salesperson is deliver the message with clarity and confidence. So another third party gets on board and says, okay, I understand where you're going. They can see the value. And so when you circle back, if you're an unknown quantity, it makes it much more difficult for you to close a deal. I think on one of my second emails, I put in there, I say, hey, look, we can put you in touch with recent clients or current clients subject to their agreement to chat with you. Alternatively, you can go to smithandsons.ca/customer reviews. And at your leisure, you can check out these videos of past clients clients that we've done work with in the last couple of years. So what I'm trying to do is, I know there's doubts in their mind as to who they should do business with. And I know that there's more than one part of a deal than just the dollar. And so, for me as a builder, I've got to give myself the best chance. Now, I think the next point here is about follow-up, but we'll get to that in a minute. And so really, we've got to think about the typical scenarios. The other thing is objection handling. So what I need you to understand is that when they raise an objection, oh, Max, your price is too high. I could have easily got offended because I'm like, well, you don't know what I know. And those Muppets walk through your house for 5 minutes and they haven't sat there and done a 100-line estimate, blah, blah, blah. The thing is that the lady who was talking to me about her brother-in-laws and they said my price is too high, she was acting out of fear. Now, if she goes and gets another couple of quotes and they all come at the same level as mine, and yet I've got more social proof on my website than these other characters, it's highly likely that she could come back to me and say, we've reconsidered. And do I put my price up when I reconsider and present that again? Possibly. Because if they come back to me, all of a sudden now I hold the leverage, right? Now, this is just a side note. Those notes went into JobTread for us, so that in the event that she does come back to us 6 months later, I can quickly review her file. I don't think I'll forget her because it was quite offensive. Okay, but what we've got to go with is we've just got to be, what do they say? You've got to have, grace under fire, but in defeat, we've just got to have, some humility and go, well, it is what it is. We can't control where they're coming from. And those opinions of those two other guys rated more in her eyes than my opinion. So maybe I haven't done my job, right? Now, we know that when you're dealing in cold contacts like that, your conversion rate is going to take a hit, especially in the marketplace right now. Now, what are we now? August 2025. And so, with out the back of COVID, really high in interest, inflation, market certainty was down, people's commitment levels were not there, then you've got to understand that, there is some hesitation around doing deals with builders at the moment. And I do feel for the industry because I know there's guys right now that are going out of business because they're not able to hold their breath financially. And I know that I'm quoting against some of those guys. And in the short term, I'm losing to those guys because they're just not pricing jobs to build a business. They're pricing jobs to pay their truck lease payments or their mortgage payments and feed their family, which I respect. It's just what we have to do. And I say we, Smith & Sons Coldstream, we've got to be able to hold our breath because we know the thing booms and busts. Okay, and so, we've got our eyes on the next home show coming up, and I'm not happy with how the last two home shows have performed. Ironically enough, it was through that level of, or through that time where there was high interest rates, people weren't spending, the certainty was certainly down a long way, there's a lot of uncertainty, and so because of that, they had to just hold their cards close to their chest and not do deals with guys and gals like you and me, which I respect, that's fine. But at the end of the day, what we need to understand is, and this is why when I start talking about things like you've got to have a bit of a war chest put together, you've got to have some level of savings because this is what happens. And so there'll be guys right now saying, I shouldn't have bought that truck, or I should have been putting more money aside, etc., etc. And because they didn't, they could pay the ultimate price. I know guys right now that really should declare bankruptcy because they're trying to finagle their way out of a fairly dire situation financially. and it's it's borderline illegal. If you're trading insolvent, if you can't pay your bills, if you're robbing from Peter to pay Paul, and you've got like this, they're the absolute telltale signs that the business is in trouble. If you've not got the ability to pay your bills on time as they become due, you're on your way out the back door, and you need a Hail Mary. And unfortunately, a lot of these guys, they'll go and do what they've got to do to get the money just to survive, and they still don't make it. And then there's a whole lot of other people get hurt. That's why when we're talking about when we get payments from clients, we've got to put that money aside, let's say into the vendor account. And that is not your operational capital. That is for subcontractors and suppliers. If you've just got the one account, you don't know where you're standing. If you're not doing work in progress accounting, over under billings, so you're not doing that adjustment on a monthly basis, you don't know what your equity position is. You don't know what your cash position is. And therefore, you are absolutely flying blind. Okay? Don't even get me started on activity key metrics and what's going on as far as lead coming in, how much you're spending on marketing, what's your break-even point, what's your preferred monthly billables, et cetera, et cetera. Guys, this is why a lot of the successful businesses I see have either got business partners like I've got, or they've got a head of state who runs a lot of the financials and someone who's focused on the operations of the business. Because what we do is it's a lot of business to run. It's a lot of stuff going on in and around our life where we've got to stay on top of it, because once it gets out of control, if you go back and have a look for a video that I shot ages ago now, it's called How to Unbroke Your Business. If you are behind the eight ball financially, I want you to go and find that video or that podcast. It's called How to Unbroke Your Business. It will clarify for you how great your challenge is to pull yourself out of the financial quagmire, right, based on your future ability to close deals, even at a good margin. Guys, you just got to keep it real, because it will absolutely bite you in the ass, okay? So know your price, know your value, know your specifications. I say to, in this marketplace that I play in, we've got a designer that's just stepped in on this larger job last minute. I did warn the clients and said, hey, you really need a designer. No, I've got a family member that can do it. Well, then when I gave him a 42-page selection sheet, that's when it became pretty apparent that, and maybe I didn't do the right thing. See, I thought by just telling them that they would understand. How would they know what a selection sheet looks like? They're not builders, I'm the builder. But when I walked in there with a 42-page selection sheet that's got, 260 or 360 line items, that all of a sudden went, we need a designer. Now, the problem with that is there's a whole bunch of changes, and it's going to hijack my ability to get started on that project. So that's on me. That's my cock up. In hindsight, if I go around again, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to lead out with, hey, just to give you an example, here's the selection sheet from the last job that I did. They're like, do you think we should get an interior designer? I would say absolutely. Now, the problem I've got right now is the clients have engaged that designer directly instead of through me. That's a problem, because now I don't have as much control over that designer as what I'd like. And that to me that's probably the biggest concern of mine. And I've already told the client straight up. I said, mate, they've got a tendency to drive a wedge between you and me, because they're there trying to justify their existence because they're working directly for you. The minute that they think they're going to do you some favors by giving me a hard time, mate, that designer is going to be in for a world of hurt, because this client needs to know that I am still the lead dog. I'm still pushing this thing through. Okay, don't get me started there. Right. So the next one there is just the 3 steps to move to a sale. I think that's what we're talking about, to move it through to a sale. And it's really simple. The first one is you just got to discover the need. So we go through the discovery process. We present the solution. So they go, well, this is what we've got and this is what we're dealing with, and the house is too small, blah, blah, blah. And then we go, right, we can do this for you. And then the final thing is obviously to confirm the commitment. So, you've heard me talk about it before. I think I might have mentioned this a couple episodes ago, but for me, to be able to get that from once we create the solution, we know what we've got to do, then I've got to get a proposal to them. And so I've got to go through that selection, specification, pricing to finally get them to a contract to close the deal, right? So you've got to have some clarity on what it is that you're talking about. Now, follow up is number 5. And I think, not that we go out of our way to be lazy follow-uppers, but really the follow-up does win the deal. Because this is where we start asking the client for the business. And I think, I know I might have told this story before, but one story that comes to mind is when I had one franchise would start with me, and I said, how many deals, how many quotes, how many contacts have you got out there that are in limbo, that aren't a hard no? And he said, about 20. I said, right, today and tomorrow, what you're going to do is you're going to go and knock them off the fence. You're going to go and ask for the business. Now, because in his mind, he thought, well, I've got all of this potential work out there, when really it didn't mean anything. You've got to figure out. So the follow-up is where you've got to figure out who are the players and who are the pretenders. And so if you can do that in a way that is organized, then I don't know how you do it if you don't have a piece of software, but I know with my Kanban system, working from left to right, from lead in, right through to construction, through to warranty, post-construction, etc., I can literally, in a fairly quick time, I can see new leads that have come in via the internet. Yesterday we got a lead through House. Now that doesn't go automatically, that just comes in on email. So I've got to manually enter that into JobTread. But then once it's in the system, I can then keep pushing that along the various columns until I, get it to where I want to get it, or it basically goes off the deep end. We either go suspense or it's a no-go. Okay, so obviously we've talked about this as speed. See, money loves speed. So, even for me, I'm not perfect at follow-up because I've probably got a bit too much on my plate, and being retail, knowing what retail demands, and that is very quick attention. Now, does it win? And this is sort of my argument. I would not go against speed. If you can get a lead and get to the phone call, it's always going to come across much better. There's no question. Okay, but I know sometimes, even at my best, I've still not been able to close deals because the client is focused on the money, which is okay. It just means when I'm competing against other builders who are happy to work at that number instead of my number up here, then that's the game, right? And so that's why it's all then about leads coming in top of funnel. And sometimes, that lead coming in, you need an oversupply of opportunity, because the numbers of leads that are tire kickers, time wasters, price checkers, wood ducks, pretenders, it's quite high. And this is why you and I need to not rush out and go, I'll give you a quote. Because what you'll have on your hands then is a whole bunch of leads that are probably no-goes that you're going to have to follow up. Because otherwise in your mind, you'll be like, oh, I wonder if there's still a deal. And that's why it's important to know what your offer is. Go back to point number 3, know what your offer is, and be able to have that conversation as part of that conversation around the scope, around timelines, around availability, for us, and of course around what their perceived expectation is as it relates to the investment that is required. So really to go from, that follow-up, we've got to get to them, as quickly as we can. And what I say is, and I know this is probably just me trying to appease myself, but once I lose a deal to one truck and ladder guy or chuck in a truck, well, then he's tied up now for 3 months, so I don't have to compete with him. But it seems like it just keeps coming. There's always someone else I'm competing with. And so whenever I get someone recommended to me at this point in time, knowing that that's where the marketplace currently is, then that's one I rush to, because you can't get better than a referral. It's always worth probably 5% more than your standard pricing might be, because there's certainty and there's reassurance there. So it's, super important. So people do business with people they know, like, and trust. And I think that, we've got to understand that in this day and age, it's going to take those 12 to 20 touch points. Now, if you go, oh, that sounds like too much. The thing is, if you go, I'm going to consciously make an effort to touch base with those clients a dozen times before I ask for the business, somewhere in the middle between 0 and 12, they might just stop talking to you. And then they'll go into the suspense file. 30 days later, you'll follow them up. If there's still no contact, they're out the back door and they're a no-go based on lack of communication. And so what we're doing is we've got to be very much like a chef in a restaurant, where the ticket comes in and you just deal with it. It's like, right, this is what this ticket requires. And you've just got to draw that line between going and being a great servant and giving this client everything they want, and they're absolutely just milking you for information because you're a diligent, good human. And then sometimes, going the other way and just being fairly nonchalant. I mean, I might have made reference to a phone call I had with a client. Certainly not my proudest moment, but, I was pretty short because her expectation was way down. Now, I made the mistake of not talking to her, saying that this is a $30,000 to $40,000 job. She thought it was going to be a $10,000 job. And I told her on the phone in my Friday afternoon haste to get out the office, well, I'll never get that 8 hours back. That I don't recommend to my elite business advisory clients. That's not how you do it. Right. So really, in conclusion, you really want to map out clearly in your mind what does your client journey look like? Is there something here where you can begin to craft? Like, folks, you need to know what you're going to do next with that client. See, if you don't have that mapped out, you're taking a client on a journey that's is not very well defined. So if you don't know what your next step is, then your client will feel that. They'll feel the uncertainty. They'll feel the lack of confidence. And that gets them worried. They're like, are we going to invest? If I've got a client that's going to invest $1 million in a second story addition, that client needs to know categorically that I know what I'm doing. Okay? And that is a lot of the difference, right? Because if they lose confidence in you as the leader of that project, that's when they'll start backing out. So everything might start and feeling good and honky-dory, but over time, the relationship has deteriorated because the trust in you, the builder, has deteriorated because you're wobbling. You don't know what's up next. And a lot of the time is like I've had to face some issues and still continuing. I've got meetings tomorrow with our client. I've got to resolve those. So for me, my superpower is that when something comes up, I run to it. It's like, right, my business partner and my architect, we're coming out there. Then I'm going to double back, talk to the designer. Like, I'm in control. And the client sits back and goes, Max is in control, right? And then you've just got to really figure out your action steps. And sometimes you're going to need scripts. Sometimes you've got to run scenarios and go, what are the common objections that I get? How do I rebut those? Like, what's the best way for me to, remove the confusion and then instill some confidence and some belief in me, the builder, from the client? Because there's some testing going on, and you've got to be careful because a lot of things that we do are subconscious. My personality is an A-type personality, and without me knowing, sometimes I create offense. I don't do it intentionally, but that's just the chemistry doesn't work. So that client might go, I hear what Max is saying, but I just, he's too much of a, he's too intense. I don't know if I don't want him to be my builder. See, and that's just the way it is. That's why usually guys only maybe marry 1 or 2 or 3 gals in their whole life. It's just like there's just a certain type of person. Like for me, having now been married 30 years, we just get on really well. It just works. And so, but I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and my wife is not everybody's cup of tea. And that's what makes the magic of chemistry. When it works, it's awesome. And, I know when I've got clients like, we did a 3,000 square foot sort of retrofit of hardy plank on a 3-story home. And that client is a recurring client. We're going to go back next year and do some more work on some decks. And we've got great chemistry. It's fun to work for those clients. They're very fair. We're fair to them. And we get on very well. And this big one that we're going to do, so far so good. There's good chemistry, good clear communication, and good leadership on my part. And I don't beat around the bush. I let them have it both barrels. So, if you want to create momentum in your sales process, here's what I'll close out. You've got to be consistent, and you've got to be confident in your execution. Right? Because there's nothing worse than someone who's wishy-washy and flipping and flopping. And all that says to the homeowner is that we're not safe with this builder. Like, we just don't know what's up. Things that I think about consciously are, the client doesn't want to know the challenges that are in my life. They don't care. They look at me as a service provider that I'm going to take their home that looks like this, 2-story, and I'm going to make it into a 3-story, and I'm going to convert the main floor from an 8-foot ceiling to a 10-foot ceiling, and I'm going to give this 10-foot ceiling on top, and we're going to have this magic overlook of the lake. That's all they care about, right? And so if I can have that, if I can have that understanding where I'm not trying to, get some sort of buy-in from them that they give a shit about me, because they don't. That's just, you're never going to win there. They're going to just get tired of that, right? So we've got to make sure that we're focusing on the core issues, and it is all about them. And we've got to work hard to make that happen. If you've got any questions, hit me up on email, max@elitebusinessadvisory.com. If you want to have a chat with me about your business and where you want to take your business, no strings attached, get across to elitebusinessadvisory.com, hit the book a consultation button. I'd love to sit down with you and have a quick 30-minute chat. And but yeah, if you want to chat about coaching for real, then I'd love to have a conversation with you and see how I can help you in that regard. Don't forget, get across Business for Builders VIP. Like and subscribe. Have a great day. Go build a kick-ass business. See you on the next episode. Cheers.